In today's video, we're talking about why anyone who owns digital games or a digital-only PS5 should be worried.
Snake, are you okay? Snake?
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. I hope you had a great weekend. I had to go to Chicago to do Christmas with my wife's family, so I only had my Steam Deck for gaming this weekend, and the game I played the entire time was Fallout New Vegas. It was awesome having this game on a handheld running at ultra settings. That is one of the best games ever. It's really hard to actually play on a PlayStation 5, unfortunately, but if you have a PS3 or an Xbox Series X or a gaming PC or even a Steam Deck like I do, I cannot recommend Fallout New Vegas enough. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about it over the years, but maybe you haven't played it, so I figured I'd bring it up. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is why it's a dark day to be the owner of a digital PlayStation 5. And you might have heard of this news story already, but on December 31st, 2023, so at the end of this month, PlayStation is actually revoking access to a lot of people who own Discovery TV shows. And at first I was like, that's a little weird. Like, I don't know how many shows Discovery TV actually owns, but PlayStation actually published a list of all the shows that are being revoked from people, and it is absolutely massive. Like, hundreds and hundreds of TV shows are being revoked from people who bought them on the PlayStation Store. All right, I understand that a lot of people probably haven't bought TV shows or movies on the PlayStation Store. I mean, last time I talked about this, because this has actually been happening a lot over the past year, people were saying, oh, I used to buy shows on my PS4 all the time, and I actually go back and watch them on my PlayStation 5 to this day. So there might be a few people out there who actually own a lot of content, but that's kind of like besides the point, because the real issue here is that Sony is taking shows away from people who purchase them outright. So like, you bought an episode of Amish Mafia, right? Like a few years ago, you were like, I'm really into Amish Mafia. I bought all of season 1. Sony is now saying that because the licensing agreement with Discovery is up, you can't download, watch, or even own that show anymore. They are literally taking it away from your account, which is crazy because this has happened before with a lot of games, right? Like Alan Wake is an example, the original game that was removed from the Xbox Store a few years ago just because of the same issue. Music licensing was not available after a certain point in time. Microsoft said, hey, we're putting the game on sale for a couple bucks until we delist it from the store. It eventually came back, but at least at that point in time, if you own the game already digitally, you could still download and play it whenever you wanted. And Microsoft is just going to come up a lot because this happens a lot with them, specifically with games like Forza Horizon, for example, and Forza Horizon 2. Those games reached their end of life, which basically means because of the insane soundtrack in those games, they ran out of licensing for those soundtracks. Both those games were also delisted from the Xbox Store, but if you already own those games in your account, or if you had them on disc, they weren't removed from your account. You were still able to play them, and you're still able to play them to this day. And honestly, I think Forza Horizon might have come back after a little bit, but yeah, the point remains. If you lose games on Xbox or PlayStation, generally speaking, you're still able to download and play them. But obviously the precedent this sets is really bad. That's the big problem that a lot of people talk about with the all digital future, is not only could games like, I don't know, Fortnite go offline eventually, and all of that money you've spent on V-Bucks to buy season passes, all of that money you've spent on skins like Peter Griffin in Chapter 5, all of that could just disappear, and it's not like you'll ever get a refund for it, right? Like, once you buy these digital online goods, when the servers go offline, those are no longer your goods. And now it's extending to full-on purchases of TV shows, so it's not really out of the realm of possibility to say that this could happen eventually with games. And the interesting thing is, on PC, there are a lot of different ways around this. First of all, the Internet Archive has games without DRM that are like not available to buy anymore. Wolfenstein 2009 is a great example. That game was from Activision, and for some reason, they ultimately had to delist it from Steam and I think the Xbox Store, so it ended up for free on the Internet Archive, and it's a pirated version for sure, but you're able to download it, install it, and play it. Then on Steam, they basically said that, yeah, even though Steam is a fully digital library sort of service, if for some reason Steam's servers went down and they decided to close down Steam, they basically flip a switch that would make every game on Steam DRM free, which means if you had a game in your account, from that point forward, you'd be able to download it, which means if you had a game in your account, from that point forward, theoretically, you'd be able to download it to your PC and play it without ever connecting to the internet. And there's this great service you can get on PC called GOG Galaxy, which I'm pretty sure CD Projekt Red actually owns, but it's a different launcher where you can log into Steam or the Epic Game Store or pretty much any launcher out there, including EA and Ubisoft, I think, at this point. And if it finds a game that you own in Steam, for example, like maybe Fallout New Vegas, a game I was talking about earlier, and it looks at its list and says, oh, Bethesda Game Studios said that if someone owns Fallout New Vegas on Steam, we can grant it to them here on GOG Galaxy. Once it's added to your GOG account, it's DRM free. You can download an EXE of that game with all of the files needed. You could back it up to a USB drive, you could back it up to an SSD, you could save it wherever you want, but you don't even need to be logged into GOG to play that file because it's DRM free. On PlayStation, it is nowhere near as cut and dry as it is on PC and these other services. Hell, it's not even that cut and dry on Xbox either. There's nothing really in the terms of service, it seems, that says, hey, just because you gave Xbox or Sony $70 or $60 or $50 or all the way down to $30, whatever you pay for a game, there's nothing in the terms of service that you technically sign every time you buy a game or use your Xbox or PlayStation 5 that says you will be able to access that game in perpetuity. And to some extent, I understand why they need wordage like that, just because online games like Fallout 76, DC Universe Online, Destiny 2, I'm trying to think of games that are only online, you know, games that are MMOs or something like that don't have full-on single-player modes. Diablo 4 is a great example. Those games, they need to be protected from people suing if those servers ever go offline, but that verbiage should be extended to the game and not necessarily the service. Like, this is absolutely crazy considering Sony's not refunding any of these people, right? They're saying, hey, thanks for buying these shows a little bit ago. I hope you got enjoyment out of them. I hope you watched them. But just because you bought them, you didn't. You actually just rented them from us until our license expired. And we did not make that clear at all that that was even a possibility. Sorry, tough luck. So if they're willing to do that for TV shows and they're not going to extend any sort of olive branch to people and say, hey, well, at least give you some credit for the PlayStation Store on what those episodes cost now, or maybe even what you paid for them, that stands to reason that they could do this same thing with games down the line. And I don't know, like, this could happen now with a studio like Embracer Group, right? Like, they bought so many different studios throughout the gaming industry. They bought the people who made Time Splitters, they bought the people who made Insurgency Sandstorm, they own Deep Silver, which means they're the publisher of Dead Island 2 earlier this year. They're closing down studios left and right, and they could say, hey, we don't want to upkeep the license for these games made by these studios we closed down. We're going to let these licenses go out into the ether and basically be bought up or auctioned off. And like, if that doesn't happen, sorry, the license isn't renewed. We're going to revoke these games from your account. I don't want to be an alarmist about this, but it's not something that could happen. It's something that's actually happening. Yes, it is a little different because it's TV shows versus video games, but still, the fact that it's happening at all with digital content, specifically digital content that was bought from the PlayStation Store, there's no reason for us to give Sony the benefit of the doubt and say they would never do this with games down the line, right? Like, if they become the only console manufacturer, which is something we've been talking a lot about since Xbox has basically been saying they want to put their games eventually on PlayStation in some way, I guess, if they're the only console manufacturer out there and they're controlling everything, they have no reason not to do this eventually, right? They could theoretically do this with like the Uncharted series, right? Like Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 are available still on the digital PlayStation Store to download on the PlayStation 3, but they did re-release those games in the Nathan Drake collection. So what if they say, hey, the PS3 is super hackable these days, you can actually download any game to it, you can emulate games from it. We're going to make that a little more difficult by revoking the Uncharted trilogy from everyone who bought it digitally on the PlayStation 3. And, you know, they could roll the dice there and probably people wouldn't be too upset about it because not a lot of people are going back and playing their PS3 games. But it stands to reason that that could easily happen. And once again, we have no reason to give them the benefit of the doubt here because they're literally doing it. Now, I'm sure a lot of the blame also extends to Warner Brothers Discovery, the owners of Discovery TV. I'm assuming what's going on here is that they want to take write-downs of some sort on all of this content, and they're saying, hey, Sony, if you want to keep this content around, you basically have to buy the rights from us. And Sony's saying, no, we don't want the rights to Amish Mafia, so we'll just wipe our hands clean. But someone's got to be accountable here, right? Like, someone's got to say, hey, we sold this stuff for full price to people. They bought it thinking it was not a rental. It was something that they own digitally. And regardless of whether or not the verbiage in the terms of service says it's digital ownership or just a long-term rental or not, there's definitely a reason for people to say, hey, I bought this under the assumption that I own it because it says buy on the PlayStation Store when you buy this stuff. It doesn't say long-term rental or own for a little while and it could be taken away. It says buy, and then there's another option for rent, and I specifically picked buy, right? Like, I understand that everyone's supposed to read the terms of service when they buy anything on their console, but I think you can make a pretty good case that says, hey, I saw the word buy, I assumed fairly that I'm going to own this content forever, and I think it's on Sony and Warner Brothers Discovery to make sure that happens, right? I know people probably don't care all that much about the Discovery TV shows that are going away, but I think we need to figure out some solution here that we can prepare for this ever happening with games in the future. Normally I would say buy your games on disc, but even that is getting a lot more difficult these days, right? I hate to keep dumping on Xbox, but they are notorious for this. Like when you go to the store and you buy Halo Infinite, for example, when you put that disc in your console, it downloads the entire goddamn game. And the same thing goes for Starfield, right? Like, yes, there is a little bit of game content on the disc for Starfield, but if Xbox suddenly went out of business tomorrow and said, hey, we're leaving the servers on for the Xbox Series X and S, but you're not going to be able to buy anything from the store or download anything, you're just basically going to be able to play your discs. If you put the Starfield disc in your Xbox, you're not going to get a playable game off of that, and that's a huge problem. Now, thankfully, CD Projekt Red is keeping the physical media dream alive. If you buy The Witcher 3 on Switch, for example, the entire game is on that cartridge, and they have released a couple of patches for The Witcher 3 on Switch over the years, but it's not anything crazy. It's mostly just performance updates. And most importantly, if you take that Switch cartridge, you go buy it brand new, take it out of the shrink wrap, and it has the 1.0 version on that cartridge is going to work forever in your Nintendo Switch. Well, as long as your Nintendo Switch works. And with Cyberpunk 2077's Complete Edition that is coming out later this year, if you buy it on Xbox, ironically, I was just dumping on them, now I get to dump on PlayStation, the disc you get comes with the full game of Cyberpunk 2077 with all of its patches, and it also comes with Phantom Liberty on the disc. So if that situation I just laid out earlier actually happened, you could put that disc in your Xbox console and it would just play because it doesn't need any patches. On PlayStation 5, it looks like you're just getting the full game of Cyberpunk and you're going to have to download the expansion, which, you know, is good enough, but it would be nice to have the entire game. And then I can hit Xbox back and let you know that if you buy Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition on disc, you not only get the game with all of its patches, but you also get the Burning Shores expansion on the disc as well. So that will work forever as long as your PlayStation works too. I have so many of them behind me right there on the bottom shelf. They're Nintendo Switch games, but I have PlayStation games too upstairs, and I will be buying The Last of Us Part 2 when it comes out in the remastered form on a disc, just so I can have that going into the future, because I don't want to get to the point where we start delisting games and seeing all these game companies folding and having to do massive layoffs and releasing studios and maybe even releasing IP. Like earlier this year, Embracer Group sold off a bunch of the IP that they bought with Eidos Montreal, and that just happened out of nowhere. So I could totally see one of these studios falling apart and going away, especially in the next year with how many things are happening with studios closing and laying people off, where we could just lose access to games from our PlayStation account forever, and that would really suck, especially if we paid full price for them. So yeah, do your research. If you're buying a game, see how much of the game comes on the disc, and if you ever see a game that comes with the entire game on the disc, I would buy that, because if a lot of people do that, they go out and purchase these games and make it a point for Microsoft and Sony on their marketing sheets or whatever at the end of the year when they're telling their executives like, hey, this game sold like 2 or 3% more copies because we put the entire game on the disc. Or they can say, hey, Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition sold way more copies because it came out later on with the entire game and expansion on the disc. Then we'll start seeing that more going into the future, and ultimately that's good for us as consumers. I'm worried about the future right now with stuff like the PS6, where the PS5 already has a detachable disk drive. Like, yes, it is great, you can buy one with a disk drive, but they are definitely getting us ready for an all digital future, and they literally just proved this week that we cannot trust them to make sure that if we buy games on their PlayStation Store, or the Xbox Store for that matter, we'll be able to download those games in perpetuity going into the future. But that's all I've got for this rare single topic video. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.